Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's the end of the week. Uh, Excited for today. And we're just so happens, end of the week, start of a tiny break, 3-day weekend, and we're gonna finish period 8 today, okay? Happy times. All right, so let's get started with today's lesson. Oops. Okay, so, um, just to reiterate, because some people were confused, update on the APUSH exam 2020. This was released a week ago, so this is dated news. Exam will be Friday, May 15 at 1 p.m. Central Time. Modified DBQ 5 documents instead of the 7. And we're going to focus on core periods 3 to 7. Okay, so American Revolution, Antebellum America, Civil War, the Gilded Age, the Progressive Era, the World Wars, right, Great Depression. I'm going to get a copy of all of your essays, and the rubrics adapted. We'll take a look at the rubric. It is on the files in the class materials of the team's general tab. Okay, review question. Let's get 30 seconds on the clock to go over this primary source. Think of the point of view of the author, okay, because that's part of HIPPO. That's what we have to do on the DBQ. All right. Hey, Google, 30 seconds on the clock.
Sure, 30 seconds, and that's starting now.
Hey, Google, stop. Okay, so we're taking a look at a memorandum from Lewis F. Powell. He'll be a future U.S. Supreme Court justice, and he's talking to the Chamber of Commerce in 1971. And he's talking. Look at the language, guys. So American system being attacked, right? American economic system is under attack. So we're under attack, guys. The rhetoric is kind of hyperbolic in terms of making it very severe, right? His wording is very severe. Talking about extremists, or not talking about extremists. He's saying, hey, these aren't extremists. These aren't isolated. This is a systematic attack on our way of life, right? And it's about culture, guys. So college campus, media, intellectuals, politicians, the arts, the sciences, all these like counterculture movement, the hippies, the beatniks, they're the ones that are attacking our American economic system, right? We're capitalists, right? And so the hippies, the leftist groups, the liberals of the 60s, they were more not as conformist as the 1950s mainstream, right? So they're not conservative. They're kind of like open to social welfare, open to change and progress and progressive era style reforms. So this author, you can tell, Lewis Powell, he is conservative. He does not like the hippies. All right, so let's warm up, guys. Let's go over two different things, right? So let's go over the difference, and this is something that you should have already gone over in GoPo, right, with Mr. Cantu. Brief recap, progressives or liberals versus conservatives, right? So you got the left and you got the right, conservatives on the right, progressive-liberals on the left. Government power should be used to solve social and economic problems, kind of like in the New Deal, right? In the progressive era, the government's role is to intervene. Conservatives let people solve their own problems without government intervention, right? So it's kind of ironic that right now Even though President Trump is very conservative and the conservatives control Congress and the Supreme Court, they control everything. Um, Corporations are getting bailouts, the stock market's getting bailouts, people are getting bailouts. Not very big bailouts, mind you. Yeah, everyone's excited about that $1,200 check, even though the trillions of dollars that we're giving to corporations will give, between $14,000 and $18,000 of debt per U.S. citizen. Wow. So think about that. Okay, so today's lesson, guys, what is it? 8.13 and 8.14. 8.13, 8.14. Today's topic is on the environment, social change. And so Rachel Carson is an environmentalist who wrote The Silent Spring. Okay, and we're going to take a look at that. She was a whistleblower. She brought to light all these bad chemicals like DDT. That was really bad in the Rio Grande Valley too. DDT was a pesticide that caused all these birth defects. It was noticeable in birds. The eggs, they would lay the eggs, and then when they would sit on them, the eggs would break because the DDT deteriorated the calcium. And with babies, okay, people were getting water from the river. Okay, babies were having birth defects. The top part of their skull was being deformed or not developed. So it was just it was pretty horrible birth defects. So let's take a look on YouTube, and you can find this under PBS American Experience. And I do have the volume turned all the way up. It might get loud, so you could turn your sound down. I just want to have the volume all the way up so you can hear it, even if because if I have it low, that's as low as it goes. But adjust the volume if you need to. Ready? Okay. Oh, here we go. Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. Great environmentalist. I'm an environmentalist, guys. I love to protect the environment. That's why I like the Green Party.
It was 1962, the height of the Cold War, a moment when unrelenting anxiety about the future was leavened by an abiding faith in the power of science to secure our safety and prosperity. Then came an incendiary book that sowed seeds of doubt.
This is one of the nation's best sellers, first printed on September 27, 1962. Up to now, 500,000 copies have been sold, and Silent Spring has been called the most controversial book of the year.
At the eye of the storm was Rachel Carson, one of the most celebrated American writers of her time. With her first 3 books, a lyrical trilogy about the sea, Carson had opened people's eyes to the natural world. Now, in Silent Spring, she delivered the dark warning that they might soon destroy it.
If we are ever to solve the basic problem of environmental contamination, we must begin to count the many hidden costs of what we are doing.
Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature.
It was sort of the gospel at the time that human ingenuity would triumph over nature. What Carson was arguing was for caution. She really confronted the orthodoxies of her time.
She was accused of being a communist, of being a hysterical female Luddite. The reaction.
See, so civil rights leaders or progressive leaders or leaders who wanted to bring about change, they were often accused of being communist. That was a very easy talking point for conservatives, right? Like, oh, she wants to help the environment and stop corporations. Well, she's a communist, right? She doesn't like the free market. She wants the government to control everything. Today we see this big debate on huge environmental issues, guys. The number one being climate change, right? Also, there's still pesticides being a big problem, organic foods, how much meat people eat. It's just ruining the environment, using too many resources, too much water, too much land is being depleted. The world's going to run out of food. Using meat is not sustainable. So the environment, can only take so much, guys. And then Mother Nature sometimes pushes back. We're destroying the environment. We're tearing down the forests, burning them down. The earth is warming up. Ice is melting. Ancient viruses are frozen in the ice, guys. And all these things are bad. So Carson was warning us about this, mainly the pesticides. Where does it end? Like, can we just like dump chemicals and pesticides on crops, on the vegetables you eat, and the food you eat, without telling anybody about it? It kind of is the reminiscent of the Gilded Age, right? Where corporations did whatever they wanted.
Was to attack the messenger.
Carson was an unlikely heretic, dutiful, demure, and so jealous of her solitude that her most intimate relationship was conducted mainly through letters. She thrust herself into the public eye, all the while harboring a secret that was literally killing her. To some, Silent Spring was an act of heroism. To others, an irresponsible breach of scientific objectivity. But there could be no dispute that with her rebuke to modern technological science, Carson had shattered a paradigm.
Rachel Carson not only changed the kind of questions we ask about the environment, I think she caused us to start to ask those questions. She's the instigator.
Okay. So, great film. There's 5 more minutes of that, but yeah, we can't just watch the whole thing. But yeah, gotta know Rachel Carson, guys. Rachel Carson, so important. So, let's read this excerpt from Rachel Carson here. You can see on the side. We poison the caddisflies in the stream, and the salmon runs dwindle and die. We spray our elms, and the following springs are silent of robin song, not because we sprayed the robins directly, but because the poison traveled step by step through the now familiar elm leaf earthworm robin cycle. These are matters of record, observable, part of the visible world around us. So she's just showing about the food web, what we put in our bodies. Everything's connected, guys. If we poison the animals, we poison the plants and the vegetables with our pesticides, it will end up in us, and that's what causes all these problems. Cancer, health, birth defects, very bad stuff, guys. All the bees are dying, and the bees pollinate all the fruit, there would be a food shortage without pollination. The bees are dying because of the pesticides we use. Not good, guys. Okay, so would you think a conservative president would support these, or a liberal president? Environmentalism. Environmental concerns have been growing. Massive Earth Day demonstrations in 1970 led to presidential support of Earth Week in 1971. Signed the Clean Air Act in 1970. Reduce auto emissions. Gonna regulate levels of pollution. That's why everyone has to get the sticker for the inspection of the vehicles every year, in order to see if the emissions are okay, not too much pollution. Environmental Protection Agency, which has been weakened nowadays, but a very important agency that helps make sure there's no dumping of chemicals by corporations. So who do you think? You think it's a liberal or a conservative? Oh, it's Richard Nixon, who is a huge conservative, but he was very keen on protecting the environment, guys. So even though Richard Nixon was caught up in the Watergate scandal, which was in our reading in chapter 29, and is in your weekly reading quiz, he did good things, guys. He did try to protect the environment, guys. Okay, not everyone is just purely, we remember him for the corruption, but he did a lot of good things, guys. Oh boy. I skip. Man, my mouse is broken. Keeps double clicking. Okay, what's the connection between these two documents? All right, look on the left, we have Nixon's address, and then look at this document, the imports of crude oil. I'm going to give us 1 minute on the clock. Hey Google, put a minute on the clock.
Sure, 1 minute, and we're starting now.
Hey Google, stop. Okay, so you can see Richard Nixon on the left. He's talking about the energy policy for America, like how are we gonna power stuff, right? And he's talking about a crisis, energy crisis. People can only go 50 miles an hour to save gasoline. We're gonna close the gas stations on the weekends, and so we need to cut back on our consumption of oil. On the right, you see how many billions of barrels of crude oil we're importing. Now, this is all in reference to the OPEC crisis, right? The oil producing exporting countries. And so in the Middle East, a lot of these countries didn't want to, these Middle Eastern countries and Venezuela didn't want to give America oil anymore because we supported Israel in the 6-Day War against Egypt, right? So they were mad at us, so they stopped giving us oil, and then there was a huge crisis, and there was an oil shortage, guys. There was like crazy, insane lines for gas. Okay, today's overview, guys. In Topic 813, the environment, and 814, society and transition, we're gonna build an argument. We're gonna make a thesis statement today. We're gonna interpret sources. We're gonna analyze documents, okay? Which is what we have to do for the DBQ, which you should already know. Liberalism reached its peak in the mid-60s. In the 60s, that's when, you know, a lot of reforms, a lot of changes happen with the hippies. But then it's going to come back around, okay? Conservatism will rise in America in the 70s. We're going to figure out why. Why did conservatism rise in the 70s? At the end of the lesson, we're going to figure out, like, America became more conservative for reasons including loss of faith in government, increase in religious activism, and reactions against social changes in the 1960s. Okay. Watergate scandal, guys. Now this source is going to be on the reading quiz. Okay, so Richard Nixon is the only president that has been removed himself from office. So he had to resign as president, and that's because there was a scandal at the Watergate Hotel. So the Watergate Hotel was the Democratic National Committee's headquarters, the DNC headquarters. And the Republican, like, special investigation groups that were working for Nixon, they broke into the hotel to try to figure out the plan of the Democrats. Nixon didn't order that. They did it on their own. But then when he found out about it, he covered it up, or he tried to cover it up, and that's obstruction of justice. And he recorded himself talking about it because he recorded all of his conversations in the White House. So he kind of screwed himself over in that situation, right? And so he had to turn those tapes over, and he was guilty, and he knew he was going to go either to prison or get impeached. So he decided to resign, because it is better to quit than to get fired. Okay, you want to know more about Watergate? Scan the QR code, and there's a documentary on that. Okay. Economic problems. Let's talk about the 70s, guys. Inflation's going to rise. There's going to be high interest rates. The economy is not going to grow. There's going to be an oil crisis because of OPEC. And this is called stagflation, guys. Stagflation. It's going to plague Jimmy Carter's presidency, and it's going to be one of the reasons why he doesn't win again at the end of the 70s, and he's beaten by Ronald Reagan. Okay. Another problem, you know, like the Iranian hostage crisis. The Iranian Revolution, you know, American hostages were captured in Iran at the Iranian embassy and held for a very long time, more than a year. Let's take a look at the Iranian hostage crisis. Okay, this guy from the History Channel. Let's see if the volume. Great. Let's turn him up.
Fall of 1979, protesters broke into the American embassy in Iran, took dozens of people hostage, and kept them there for a long, long time. This was the Iran hostage crisis, an episode that changed the course of American history. Let's take a step back. This hostage crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of several decades of bad blood between the United States and Iran. In 1953, the U.S. helped topple Iran's elected prime minister, replacing him with Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, also known as simply the Shah. The Shah was friendly to the U.S. interests, particularly when it came to oil. The Shah was about as popular in Iran as ants at a picnic. He was a brutal dictator, and his infamous secret police, the Savak, terrorized, tortured, and killed people. Opposition to the Shah grew and grew. In January of 1979, he and his family left Iran on vacation, never to return. By the spring...
So yeah, guys, the Shah, he was bad news. America has a tendency to support dictators who are sympathetic or, who are supportive of America, right? Even though they treat their people horrible and there's war crimes, there's human rights violations, America was okay with them as long as they weren't communists. And we have to look back at that and like, was that the right thing to do? We were so obsessed with like anti-communism, sometimes we supported extremists, right? Dictatorships with death squads, and it was not justified. And so as a result, the causal chain, there's going to be a lot of hatred and a lot of resentment against America because of our support of a ruthless dictator. So the Iranians are not going to be happy with America. Now, was it good for them to take hostages? No. But it didn't help that America wasn't willing to give the Iranians the Shah. And because Jimmy Carter was too nice and he didn't give the Shah to Iran, they took the hostages. I probably would have just said, hey, Shah, why don't you go somewhere else like Canada or I don't know. But, I don't want any problems. So please don't make this more awkward than it already is.
Spring of that year, a religious leader, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, took power. This is the Iranian Revolution. Khomeini established a new government, an Islamic Republic. This new government, and the young masses who supported it, had no love for the United States. They staged demonstrations outside the U.S. Embassy in the Iranian capital of Tehran. Trouble was brewing. After leaving Iran, the Shah bounced around from country to country, but after a cancer diagnosis, he wanted to come to the United States to receive the best medical care. President Jimmy Carter didn't want to admit the Shah, but relented under pressure from a group of elder statesmen led by Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller. The Shah arrived at the New York hospital on October 22, 1979. As Carter predicted, giving shelter to the Shah angered the Iranian revolutionaries. A lot. So much so that on November 4th, 1979, a huge mob of protesters attacked the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Knock, knock. Who's there? 3,000 of us, and we're mad as hell. The mob took 63 people at the embassy prisoner. Later, 3 more people were taken hostage at the Iranian Foreign Ministry, bringing the total to 66. 13 days later, the Ayatollah ordered the release of 13 hostages, leaving 53. Another hostage was subsequently released on medical grounds. From then on, the remaining 52 were there for the long haul. They were held in the same embassy complex where they'd once worked. No hostages were killed, but they weren't treated well either. Some were beaten with rubber hoses or hung over elevator shafts. Several men were even victims of a mock execution. Back in the States, the hostage crisis gripped the news cycle.
Iranian militants seized the American embassy in Iran.
The American government demanded the hostages' release, but were rebuffed. The Iranians wanted the Shah shipped to them. No, said the U.S. To drive the point home, the U.S. froze Iranian assets held in American banks. But still, the Iranians didn't budge. In April of 1980, President Carter decided to try something different. He authorized a military rescue mission known as Operation Eagle Claw. But poor weather and mechanical failures doomed the mission, leaving America and the Carter administration embarrassed on the world stage. Carter was in an election, and his opponent, Ronald Reagan, pounced on him for being weak and ineffective.
Frankly, I don't think the president has done anything that he couldn't have done 5 months ago.
When Election Day rolled around, the hostages were still being held captive with no end in sight. Reagan trounced Carter at the polls. By the start of 1981, the Iranian government began to feel the pressure from the international community to release the hostages. The Iranians and Americans went back to the bargaining table. In exchange for lifting the embargo, Iran agreed to release their prisoners. Just hours after Ronald Reagan took the oath of office on January 20th, 1981, the American hostages were freed from captivity. The hostage crisis lasted 444 days. It was a bruising period for the United States and for President Carter. And the ugly mark it left on relations between the United States and Iran lingers to this day.
And that's why there's still a lot of tension between Iran and the United States, guys. We all were making memes in January about World War III and Iran, and you can see why there's a lot of beef between America and Iran, guys. It's rooted between this Iranian hostage crisis. So now you know the context behind that. Good. Let's keep going. All right. So just summation. We backed the Shah of Iran, and we kind of were heavily involved in Iranian affairs for decades leading up to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And so when we sheltered the Shah, that's what sparked the outrage. Had we not done that, President Carter was a little bit too nice. He was a peanut farmer. He was kind of seen as an outsider. He was a very nice guy, great Christian guy. He's still alive, and he's very old. He's in his 90s, and he still builds homes for homeless people with his bare hands. So he's a very nice guy. A little too nice, though, and it came out in his policies. He was successful with the Camp David Accords. He made a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, but then the president of Egypt got assassinated. So it was a crazy. The 70s were a very insane decade, guys. The President Nixon resigned, stagflation, Iranian hostage crisis, disco, lots of crazy things going on, guys. Okay. Why did conservatism grow in America? That was the overriding question, guys. Well, you can see in the 70s, guys, the Pentagon Papers were released, and the Pentagon Papers were classified documents, kind of like WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, like a whistleblowing, like American human rights violation. But the Pentagon Papers showed that, because the story officially from the American government was that Vietnam just kind of happened. We didn't really plan for it, but that wasn't true. The Pentagon Papers showed that America had our eyes and our ideas about involving ourselves with Vietnam all the way back to the 50s with Eisenhower. So Eisenhower, and then JFK, they were all pretty much bent on eventually getting involved with Vietnam. And so the government was lying to the American people. So Vietnam was a big, blow up in our face, especially with the Pentagon Papers. Watergate scandal, people just don't trust the government, right? And it's understandable. The economy was horrible. Oil embargo from OPEC, the Arab countries, was bad. The Iranian hostage crisis. So people just were fed up. They were like, wow, we gave liberalism a chance, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Let's try Ronald Reagan, who's conservative, right? So here's what we're going to do together. We're going to go over these 6 documents, and we're going to try to think about why the document offers why conservatism rose in America, okay? Because that's going to be our thesis. That's going to be the question that we're trying to answer, okay? So think about that question again, and we're going to focus on this, okay? Document 1. 30 seconds on the clock, guys. Hey, Google, 30 seconds on the clock.
Sure, 30 seconds. And we're starting now.
Barry Goldwater, conservative. Hey Google, stop. So bottom line, Barry Goldwater, he's a Republican. He will try to become president and lose, but he was a very influential conservative, and he's saying that America is getting corrupted. The government is too big, and it needs to stay out of stay out of its scope in certain facets like business, right? Like it should stay out of regulating business, stay out of people's lives. And so this is Barry Goldwater. Government is far too involved in our lives and is spending too much money. He lost against LBJ, But he made an impact, guys. He started the dialogue. People were starting to think like, okay, maybe he's right. Key sentence is the root evil is the government is engaged in activities in which it has no legitimate business. Okay. Document number 2. At the 30 seconds. Hey Google, put 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay, 30 seconds. And we're starting now.
Hey Google, stop. Okay, so here's Milton Friedman. Sorry, he's a prolific economist who focuses mainly. He's more focused on like being libertarian. He's a. I don't want to get you confused. Let's just say he's a capitalist, okay? Because I could say, oh, he's neoliberal, but then that'll confuse it. But he is kind of conservative, right? So he's just saying, look, the government needs to back off. It needs to stop intervening. Let the market run itself, right? Let the market run itself. I know you're doing microeconomics with Mr. Cantu. He would probably believe that, right? Because Mr. Cantu is conservative. So let the market run itself, all right? Let the government stay out of it, all right? The government isn't gonna, it just makes things complicated. It doesn't, the Great Society didn't really work. The New Deal didn't really work. But it's like, hey, the Gilded Age didn't work, all right? And that is essentially, no government intervention. So the Gilded Age was bad and the Roaring Twenties were bad. But whatever. Okay, this is what he believes, that the government shouldn't, regulate or intervene. New Deal, government programs like the New Deal and the Great Society with LBJ have not helped us progress. Individuals in a laissez-faire system have, right? Laissez-faire means free market, okay? Let the market run itself. Let's have no rules, no regulations. Let's just businesses doing business, competing with each other. That is what makes things better. Because magically businesses will pay their workers fairly and make fair prices. Yes. Hypothetically, right? Okay, good. Document 3. Hey Google, put 30 seconds on the clock.
All right, 30 seconds. And that's starting now.
Hey Google, stop. This document is one of my favorites. This document's written by not to call anyone out, but the meme is written by a Karen, right? She wants to talk to the manager. So look, she's saying, I am a law-abiding citizen and I'm getting discriminated against for dope addicts and crackheads and people on welfare, cheaters, swindlers, and I live by myself as a widow. I pay my taxes. I get very little for that. And that might be very well true. The system is not helping her. Life's tough, especially in the 70s when the economy was doing pretty bad. And then she's like, my typewriter was stolen, probably by a crackhead, right? So she is just up in arms. And she's making all these arguments that somehow people are out to get her. And sometimes people can feel cheated. People can feel like the system's against them, right? But they'd like to blame the easy targets. But in this case, she's saying yes. It's the government's fault. It's not, corporate America's fault or big businesses. Okay. So I work hard and the government is not helping me at all, right? And people believe that, right? Like, we work hard, and some people, they don't work at all, and they get food stamps and WIC and stuff. And that's the argument, right? That's the talking point. But then it's like, well, what about if, there's arguments like, well, what if everyone, doesn't matter, just gets Medicare for all? That's an argument for today. Doesn't everyone needs help? Maybe. But she's saying that she's not getting any help, and she works really, really hard, and it's understandable, guys. A lot of people get frustrated. Now the economy's doing bad. A lot of people are losing their jobs, guys. Okay, number 4. Jerry Falwell. Okay. Hey, Google, put 30 seconds on the clock.
All right, 30 seconds. Starting now.
Hey, Google. Hey, Google, stop. Okay, so here we see...
Sorry, I don't understand.
I'm trying to explain, Google. So we're trying to look at the motivations. This is a religious, television evangelist, right? So this is a Christian viewpoint that, the 60s was just a huge departure from the 50s. People were doing drugs, gender roles are being redefined. We had a lot of civil rights, gay rights, Chicano, the United Farm Worker Movement. And they're like, now people, it's like socialism and welfare. People are lazy, they don't work. The culture is just really, really changing. There's no morality anymore, there's no ethics. So this person's very traditional, this is conservative. So the main points from this, the television, right? Children are moving away from traditional religious values. TV teaches immorality, and the TV shows are violent, movies are violent. Nowadays they say the video games are violent, they cause all the problems. I don't, that's debatable. Disrespecting the family, okay? Ooh, I see a lot of that as a teacher. Yeah, no discipline, right? No respect anymore. Public schools are secular. That's true. Separation of church and state. Drug culture. Well, in the 60s, a lot of people smoking dope, doing acid. Government teaches them to be lazy. Well, people can see that way. If there's social welfare and helping the impoverished, people can see it as that way. That you don't have to work to get help. So this is a religious leader, guys, and they're going to influence a lot of Christians to believe this way. Okay. Document 5. Republican Party platform. This is going to be Ronald Reagan's platform, guys. He's going to beat Jimmy Carter easily. Just smacks him around. Okay, landslide victory. Poor Jimmy Carter. Just everything kept going wrong for him, even though he was a nice guy. Hey, Google. 30 seconds on the clock.
All right, 30 seconds. Starting now.
Hey, Google, stop. Okay, so obviously this is an election year, so they're going to try to smack down Jimmy Carter's presidency. They're saying we're not strong anymore. We need to bring peace by being strong. We need to make America great again. That hasn't been used. That wasn't, the MAGA hats. It's not the first time we've used that phrase. The Soviet Union was taking over Afghanistan. That's the time period in Metal Gear Solid 5. You're in Afghanistan. The Soviets are trying to take it over. And so just a lot of fear that we're weak, and people saw that America was, struggling. So people wanted to be strong again, and sometimes you want that power. Um, and well, it's going to cost a lot of money. So yeah, that's the platform, guys. Let's have a strong military. Let's be strong again. Um, so translation: America has lost international respect, and Carter has only made it worse. So Reagan wants to turn it around, okay? And he does in some ways. Okay, document 6. Hey Google, this is the last document, guys. 30 seconds on the clock.
Is what?
Oh God. Hey Google, 30 seconds on the clock.
Sure, a 30-second timer called Hoka-Hey. Starting now.
I don't. Just read, guys. Okay. Hey Google. Hey Google. Stop. Okay, so the ERA, guys, is the Equal Rights Amendment, which never got passed by. It's was almost passed, but 2 states haven't ratified it. So it could have been another amendment to ensure equal rights for women, um, because. But this lady, right, Teddy, she's saying, "Hey, I'm a woman, and everything's fine. Why are we just living in the past? Everything is okay. Women should take care of their husbands and children and homes. Um, like, there's no problem, right? Uh, but women have been treated pretty bad, guys, and especially in the 70s in the workplace, like just not an equal playing field for women. And there's still a higher paying gap, like management levels, management positions are predominantly held by men. Um, and that's where that wage gap, emerges. So this author is conservative, and they're saying, well, women don't need to be liberated from the home. The home is what we love, right? Women, they love being home. They don't want to have a career. They don't want to, learn stuff. They just want to be at home, cooking and cleaning, and honestly, guys, no. I mean, all of us were supposed to go to college, have a career, do what makes us happy, right? And it's okay to be a housewife. That's fine, or a house husband, right? Stay-at-home dad. Either way, it's a very admirable position. It's a very hard work, but it doesn't have to just be women. It could be men too. The women could be a lawyer or a doctor and make all the money, and the husband could, if he's not as skilled, stay home or take turns, right? The husband one time and the wife the other. That's what people are trying to push for. Okay. And we're kind of running short on time. Let's go over the thesis, guys. Here's the question stem. Explain the reasons why a new conservatism rose to prominence in the United States between 1960 and 1989. Take a minute and write a preliminary thesis for this question. This is going to be on your exit ticket, guys. Okay? I will give you some hints, but I want you to write what you came up with for your thesis, okay? Hey, Google, let's put a minute on the clock.
Okay, 1 minute. And we're starting now.
So based on what we analyzed with the documents, should be talking about society, economics, politics. Okay, your A, your B, your C. Remember the thesis formula. Hey Google, stop. Okay, so acceptable thesis statements. What you're going to want to have in your thesis statements, defensible claim, right? You're taking an argument, your X, right? X is the claim. I'm sorry, X is the counterclaim. The Y is the claim of the thesis formula. So despite X, or although X, however, Y, because A, B, C. That's your thesis formula. So Y, and an easy way is Y, the claim. Claim because of A, B, C, or key points. Social, economic, political. Reaction against big government, opposition to women's movement, rise of religious groups, belief in free market economies, concerns about the economy, desire to return to more traditional values. More sophisticated thesis might indicate which one of these factors was the most important versus less important, right? So X, the counter-argument, would be the less important one, right? Although some people say it was a return to more traditional values, the main reaction was against big government, loss of faith in the government from the 70s with the Nixon resignation and stagflation in the economy, right? Keep in mind, don't do this in your thesis. Don't not answer the question, right? You got to answer the prompt. You got to respond to the prompt, right? Don't fail to make a claim, right? Don't just restate the question, but you don't really answer anything, okay? Fail to give reasons why conservatism rose, or just restate the prompt, right? I'm going to just, whatever the question said, conservatism rose, right? Well, you got to say why conservatism rose. We know it rose, okay? Tell us why, all right? Here's some examples of an acceptable thesis. The most important factors that contributed to the birth of the new conservative movement were a desire for more reliance on free market capitalism, a society oriented toward traditional morals and values, and a government that was strong on both foreign and domestic policy. Many claim that the new conservatism rose to prominence in the U.S. between 1960 and 1989 because of the instability of the economy. However, three more important causes were the left activist influence on politics, the breakup of the traditional family life, and the effects of counterculture within society. Therefore, the rise of the new conservatism resulted from the desire to return to structure and order. So these are two excellent theses. They're very complicated. The first one's a little bit, more straightforward. The second one shows the nuances between the least important and the most important, right? Contextualization guides. This is going to be in your intro, okay? So this is also going to be in your exit ticket. In your exit ticket, we're just going to be doing contextualization and your thesis. It's pretty much your body paragraph, okay? And then I'll be giving you feedback because we're going to be starting, we're going to be working on a DBQ event next week. So contextualization, what could you use for contextualization? What is the background information, right? What's happening in the 60s and the 70s that leads to this? It has to connect to the question. So contextualization, reactions against movements in the 1960s, counterculture, anti-war movement, sexual revolution, Cold War, part of the larger story in the post-World War II America, concerns over the New Deal and Great Society, interventions in the economy. So this is all stuff you would talk about at the beginning of the essay, right? You would start off by saying, okay, you set the stage, right? You're like, well, as we all know, in the 1960s, the counterculture movement, the anti-war movement against the Vietnam War, and the sexual revolution broke against traditional values for Americans. The Cold War was lingering and causing a lot of turmoil in America. And the conservatism rose in response to the Great Society and the New Deal, and the role of the government in the economy. Okay, so you would write all that, and then boom, then you do your thesis statement. And there's your first paragraph. And we're going to do that, and I've already told you the answers. Complexity, this is at the end of the essay, right, in your conclusion. Okay, can you corroborate, qualify, or modify the argument? Corroborate, give evidence for different themes, perspectives, or regions. Qualify, give multiple ways conservatism rose and explain why some are more important than others, or give ways that conservatism did not rise. Modify, argue that conservatism didn't really rise or that its rise wasn't important. Okay, so that's how we make it complex. You compare it to different periods of time. Hey Google, let's put 30 seconds on the clock.
Sure, 30 seconds. Starting now.
So what is this historian's argument about why conservatism rose to power in the 1970s? Hey Google, stop. Okay, so the moral majority, Christian voice. So this historian is kind of giving the reasons what the agenda was, why conservatism rose to power, right? And we can see here, opposition to feminist and gay rights movements, support for school prayer, need for increased defense spending, Christian groups organize, become more involved in politics, okay? We see a rise in evangelicalism, right? The Christian right. They're going to be against a lot of these things that were emerging in the 60s and the 70s, right? The pendulum of politics is swinging from the left to the right. Debrief. Why did conservatism grow in America? Okay, let's go over what we learned today. Sense that the national government had grown too powerful. Believe that laissez-faire was more effective than government programs created by liberals. Some Americans felt social programs did not benefit from them. Belief that young people were straying too far from traditional values or religion. Sense that American power in the world was slipping. Opposition to feminist movements' goals of reproductive freedom and liberation, right? So access to birth control. You know, the issue of abortion is going to emerge in the 70s with Roe versus Wade. And people just had very little trust in the government, especially after the Watergate scandal and the stagflation. Very good. The AP exam practice will be on the exit tickets, guys, okay? So that concludes our lesson for today. Make sure you do the weekly reading quiz. And I will see you here again on Monday. Have a good 3-day weekend, guys. Enjoy your break and enjoy your families.